Hello, everyone. I'm Zach Ditmarsh for Fish Talk Magazine. Thank you for joining us for another installment of Live with Lenny. Tonight's topic is what's in store for rockfish season in 2024. If you're watching this, I'm willing to bet that you probably have a vested interest in the striped bass fishery here in the Chesapeake Bay and Mid-Atlantic, just like us here at Fish Talk. We're excited to have some very special guests joining us tonight who are experts in the field, one of which is our very own angler-in-chief. Please welcome Mr. Lenny Rudo.
Hey, what's happening, Zach?
What's happening?
Not much. It was an awful nice day out there today, and I didn't get to enjoy it on the water.
Well, it was always the weekend.
It's coming.
Well, we got a lot to discuss, a lot of big announcements this week, so we're just going to dive right into it. I'm going to step behind the curtain here. I just like to remind all the readers out there, just be kind, be civil. We're all friends here, you know.
We're all anglers.
Don't say anything you wouldn't say to your mother. How about it?
All right, we're all on the same team, people.
All right, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
So before we get started, I want to mention that Fish Talk contributor Wayne Young has dedicated a copy of Chesapeake Bay Fishing Reefs 2, and that is one thick book, people, for some lucky prize winner tonight. Now, how are you going to win this book? It's very simple. Ask an intelligent question. Remember, we do this live because we want to hear your input. We want to hear your questions. We want to find out what you want to find out. And so we invite your questions to come in the comments section. Please put them up. Zach will throw them up on screen. That goes for questions for me or questions for our guests tonight. And the winner of this book is going to be up to our guests. We have today with us two very knowledgeable people about the rockfish situation. And they're going to pick at the end. They're going to say, you know what? This person asked a really good question. This shows some real thought. They should win a book. So that's how you're going to win the book tonight. Now, as you probably know, we have shifted today's date. This really should be taking place next week. We normally do Live with Lenny the first Thursday of every month. Why did we change it? Well, because next week, if we did it on Thursday, we would miss the meeting on Wednesday. And there's a very important meeting coming up, people, and it will have an impact on what happens with our 2024 season. It is our chance to give public input to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And, from what I've seen through the years, well, you could argue that the state of Maryland DNR does not necessarily put a whole lot of weight into public comment. The ASMFC actually does. They really seem to listen and pay attention. So this is going to be our chance to talk to them. We're going to talk all about the meeting. We're going to talk about the different options that are on the table, the different possibilities for what we might have for 2024 regulations. And we're going to do it with some, like I said, very knowledgeable folks. First up, we have as a guest tonight, David Sikorski. Let's bring on Dave. David is the executive director of CCA Maryland, and he also is a Atlantic States Marine Fisheries proxy commissioner. Did I get that right, David?
Close enough. Yep, I'm the legislative proxy for Delegate Dana Stein, who is the legislator that holds the seat. So,
so that means you get a vote, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a legislative seat and a governor's appointee and a administrative seat that makes up the three-person delegation to the ASMFC for each species board. And the administrative seats, of course, DNR folks. And there's proxies and opportunities for different people to share the seat, species to species, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, the state has 3 votes. And so that when you hear us deliberate at a meeting and such, and you hear a state vote, at least 2 people would have supported something if they vote in favor.
So let's just make sure this is perfectly clear to everybody.
Yep.
The state has 3 reps. You're one of which, but you don't get to say what the state votes. It's 2 out of the 3, and then the state gets the full vote. Okay, exactly. Excellent.
And it's important to note that 2 are executive branch, governor's appointee, and the DNR folks, and so one's legislative branch. And so there's balance of power, but it's clear who gets the upper hand. And I've told people time and time again, it is our governors up and down our Atlantic coast who truly oversee the management of these fisheries, because that's the whole point of the commission. But let's get moving forward.
Okay, let's bring on our other guest. We have Mike Wayne with us as well. And Mike, is from the American Sportfishing Association. Mike, I'm going to get your complete title wrong, so please go ahead and tell us your exact position in ASA.
Sure. Yep. I'm the Atlantic Fisheries Policy Director for the association, and ASA is the tackle trade association for the recreational fishing industry. And so I cover policy work for them in the Mid-Atlantic and New England region. So work a lot with Dave, and happy to be back on live with Lenny. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let me ask you one really simple question before we get started. You represent fishing tackle folks, right? Do you think that the state of the straight bass fishery has much impact on your constituents?
Yeah, of course it does. All the status of all the fisheries up and down the coast and around the nation have an impact on our tackle manufacturers. We were just talking about this today, actually. When fishing is good, tackle industry sells tackle to our anglers. And so we want to make sure that the populations are healthy enough to support that great fishing so that we can keep the businesses robust and the populations healthy of our resources. So yeah, it goes hand in hand for sure.
And of course, straight bass is the #1 fish on our coast, up and down the coast.
In my region, absolutely.
Yeah. So a quick little follow-up question. Okay. Is it fair to say that the state of the fishery has an impact on people's jobs, people's livings?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, we were also talking about this today because there's a lot of retailers at this event that I was at, the Folsom Showdown here in New Jersey. And you can see the individuals in the room. These are businesses that employ people to sell fishing tackle. These are mom and pop shops in our coastal communities that bring anglers to the resource and supply them with the fishing tackle that they need to access those fish. And then think about all the other businesses that go along with that support it, whether you're here going to restaurants, staying at hotels. There's just a trickle effect that is really important.
Boat dealerships,
boats,
arenas. It goes on and on and on. So there's no question the economic impact of the straight bass fishery is massive. And that goes not just for Maryland, but up and down the coast. Now, before we jump in to the 2024 regulations, well, this is 2024 regulations, but before we jump in to what's going to be discussed at the meeting next Wednesday, we got a little bit of a surprise in the email inbox just yesterday, didn't we? And folks, I got to tell you, I didn't have this on the agenda, so I don't have a slide for this. I should have had one prepped, but it just came up so fast. Mike, why don't you dive right into what we have been told is being proposed for 2024, in addition to the changes we'll discuss in a minute.
Yeah, sure. So Maryland DNR released a press release yesterday announcing closure of the spring trophy fishery, which is a fishery that occurs in the bay from May 1st through May 15th. And that closure is going to be not only a harvest closure, but a no targeting closure, meaning you cannot even go out and target striped bass during that time period. You can't fish for them. You can't fish for them. Correct.
Right.
Can't
catch and release.
Cannot catch and release. And so back to your questions as you started, Lenny, what kind of impacts do these fishery decisions have on businesses? And this is going to be one of those. And so as ASA, we are hopeful that they do hold public hearings on this. There is the option for that to occur if it's requested by, maybe Dave can clarify the process there a little bit, but we are hopeful that they hold hearings. We think it's very important for our community to get the opportunity to provide input on what's being proposed so that they can be informed about what the expected impacts will be of that decision on the businesses like you talk about. Now, this is an emergency action that Maryland DNR is proposing, and that is complementary in nature to the emergency action that the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission took earlier this year when they changed the coastal slot and put in that maximum size. or sorry, reduce the maximum size to 31. Anyways, the idea is they're working on regulations that will help the resource, but importantly in that process is hearing from the stakeholders about how they feel about that proposal and what the expected impacts will be for that, so that they can have an informed decision. And we're hoping that they move forward with those hearings. Dave, can you talk a little bit about, or go ahead, Lenny.
So I just want to point out that Will's asking, so is it no targeting from April through May 15th?
Exactly.
That is accurate, Will. That is what has been proposed. And before Dave jumps on this, I'm going to ask you, Dave, take it away with this. May is probably the worst time for catch and release because it has the highest mortality, right?
I wish. You would think if you were managing based on science and based on the prevailing conditions that exist in the bay, you'd have a strong understanding of the things that, some Maryland fishery managers have said in one meeting, because it matters that warm water, we need to leave the fish alone in the summer. And then, the flipping of the script and the hypocrisy that's been going around on this issue and this fishery in Annapolis over the last many years has been, just mind-numbing, to say the least.
So I did look up some figures on this that I found really interesting, and that is that Maryland's own catch and release studies show that in the water temperatures we have during this time period, release mortality is about 1/5 of what it is during the summertime.
Yeah. I mean, we have the science. I don't want to get into the complexity and the excuses why we can't manage based on what we really know, because it's just not true. It's not that simple, I should say. There's lots of fact, but let's not kid ourselves. The department has the bully pulpit. They have a clear, they had a clear path last time in the last administration to divide people, give people special privilege, leave people out of conservation measures when the stock clearly needed it. And that's just irresponsible. Just to get back to really the matter at hand here, the trophy season, it is responsible to close the trophy season at this time, close it to harvest. But they should have done that many years ago when there was actually really still a major component of fishing mortality or a major impact on that spawning stock. That's when you close a fishery if you're actually going to make a difference. And unfortunately, during Addendum 6, which is the last changes of regulations, which we're currently fishing under, DNR played fast and loose with the numbers. And the data behind the March and April time period in 2017, which was the 1 year that managers used to compare against to make changes. So in April of 2017, which was a period that had at most, I think, a 9-day trophy season. So the very last period of April had that trophy season. Well, we all know that in April, it's windy, the weather's rough, things happen. Many charter boats try and get out there and do 2 days, but still, even in 2017, the fishing wasn't amazing, compared to the historical levels of the trophy season. And that's important to understand, because what managers do is they look back with the various data they collect and all the information compiled into a model, and you can look at it separately too. And that's something that Mike and I do all the time, to understand what's happening, because it's not as simple as these graphs and charts that you see. None of that's easy to understand. So this underlying data is so important. And what it said in that year, which was the year we were changing our regs based on. So we're saying this is the real reality, and oh my goodness, we need to adjust in relation to it. It said that there were 600,000 fish live released in the month of March and April. So 61 days with maybe 9 days of actual open season, weather, etc., slower fishing, and lots of folks that are out there just to catch their one fish and move on, right? We know these 6-pack charters and bigger that are the big trollers in trophy season, we're always out there to catch their fish and get back to the dock. So it's not like there was this uncontrolled impact on the stock, but we should have rolled back fishing mortality back then when we were really impacting them. But that 600,000 number is literally impossible to have happened. That would mean that across the winter time, anglers are catching and releasing 10,000 fish per day. And the math just isn't there. I mean, we know who's on the water in February, March, and April. There's gill netters in February catching the very same fish in Maryland. And then you have gill netters in Virginia catching the very same fish all through the wintertime with no max size limit until March 15th. You have a max size limit in Maryland of 36 inches on commercial fish, and it's touted as this amazing thing for conservation. Well, that's a 10-year-old fish. It's a female, and it's going to spawn just the same. And so just to boil it down, the underlying data we have in managing this fishery has been on a roller coaster ride recently, and it still is. And so even these numbers that we're trying to manage to, you'll hear from state agencies especially, oh, we've got to hit 14.5% like addendum 2. We've got a really crazy wide margin of error going on right now. And it's not uncommon in fisheries. And that means what we need to do is be very conservative. And I do not believe that April and May should be closed to targeting. The entire moratorium in the 1980s was not closed to targeting. Okay. So when there's a depressed stock of fish, we're not that successul as anglers.
Well, you know, I think in the 1980s, a lot less fish died when they got hooked. That's probably what happened.
They've devolved since the 80s. And so the reality is, look, what I expect from our state's leaders, and as you all can tell, I'm saying it like it is. That is the way I approach my work representing you at the commission. And it's not for one group versus another. I'm the kind of recreational angler that will go catch anything that swims anywhere, anytime. And guess what? I'll go to the seafood market and buy something if I don't catch it or I choose to release it, right? I'm the general public, just like all of you, that you might catch and release one day, because there's no such thing as no catch and release in fishing. You either by choice or by regulatory action may have to release something that bites your hook. And so the idiocy of the conversation over the last many years is nuts. That said, I commend Secretary Kurtz and his team, because it is important to take this stand and be leaders in Maryland. And his quote in the press release was right. And Maryland has a responsibility to do right by these fish. And my point of all I've been talking about is we're not using the best data, so we have to be really careful, and we have to stop pretending that certain groups don't hurt the fish as much as another, because that's a bold-faced lie. And
oh no, we lost Mike.
He'll be back.
I don't know what happened. We must have had a break.
Ranting and talking for hours. Everyone that knows me well knows I can be but I shouldn't. I want to stop. And
There he is. We got him back. That's certainly all true. No question. What we really want to make sure we let folks know tonight is that is in the works. That is a possibility. We've already lost April. It now looks like the first half of May too. I'll be the first to say, yeah, trophy season really needed to go. But I really question the validity of having no target, particularly when, there's all this talk about catch and release mortality, but no one ever talks about the fact that if a fish gets caught and released, it's just like doubled its value. Correct. Because it's been caught and then put back. It can be caught again and again and again and again. And if the MRIP numbers are right, that there's 9% mortality, which I personally do not accept, but let's just say for the sake of argument it is, that means a fish can get caught and released like 10 times, which is pretty dang valuable to the recreational fishing community, not to mention to a guide who takes out people to go fishing to catch and release fish during March, April, May, etc. But
or anyone, right? Again,
anybody who likes to go and catch the fish.
And why do we label people, and why do we allow our government to do it to us? And it's because that's how special interest wins. Period. The end. And that's what's continued to happen through the last many years. And I'm confident that it will not happen under the current leadership in DNR, but I do believe that it takes a while for it's kind of the truth to get out. And unfortunately, what we're going to talk about next is the reality of where we stand with this stock, based on the model, based on the assessment, based on what the management system's built on, which always is going to be different than what people see out the wheelhouse or over the gunnels, right? And we know that, and I think that's important stuff to talk about. I know we'll get into it. So
the reality is a big deal.
Yeah, and
we're at where we're at. We don't like it. We might not. I guarantee you, everybody watching this right now is not going to like the choices when they see the options. Nope. They're not going to like them.
Nope.
But they're the options. They're where we are. We got no control over that. Now,
nope.
We're going to. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I found one question we got to pull in, but this was all supposed to start my long rant that I'm trying to come back to the starting point, which was what happens from this process now in the trophy season regulations proposed by DNR. And I'll be quick. There is a committee of the legislature that's made up of House members and Senate members that are meant to oversee emergency regulations, because this emergency regulation does not require a formal public process like normal regulatory promulgation or normal regulatory process. And that's for kind of DNR to approve, and they explain it. In the normal process, there's a small business assessment of economic impact. It's something relatively new. It's not, it is required, but it's not necessarily, doesn't say, okay, if there's an impact then. But that's not required in the emergency process. And so the oversight piece and kind of the check and balance is that the legislative committee can call a hearing and can then at least initiate conversation with the agency that is seeking this regulatory change and make sure that there's been some sort of vetting and the concerns of the population can be heard. And so every single one of you are represented by a delegate and senator, or more than one. And so those are the people. If you look at the Maryland General Assembly website, there's a committee there. And I know that some are going to talk with these leaders, and that's the process that's available to the public in this representative world we are in. So will your local representatives understand fishing mortality, catch and release, this, that, and the other? No, probably not. But this is an opportunity to at least provide that another arena to say, okay, is this regulation that is an emergency in the choice of DNR, is this acceptable to the public? And that's the overarching thing that could play out in Maryland here in the next couple of weeks. But I don't know. It's up to the committee and those they represent to determine the right path forward. And in the end, we do have a depleted stock of striped bass, and the committee is only limited in what they could do to change the regulatory path. I think they can delay it and then negotiate essentially, and DNR can reconsider. But ultimately, DNR needs to regulate this fishery. It's their job.
Well, we've been waiting for the trophy season to go, so at least that's gone. Step in the right direction, even if we get shot in the foot at the same time. I want to point out two things. The first thing is, someone asked earlier about Virginia's trophy season. They did away with it long ago. Virginia was ahead of Maryland on this particular question mark about killing the trophies. Rich is now asking if we know the impact of catch and release on pre-spawn female striped bass. And I know from talking to you guys, I'm not the scientist on this, but I have been told by all of you folks, no, we really don't know. We don't know, if you handle that 40-inch fish and let it go, does it spawn properly? We really don't know. That is an open question. But we're not going to spend all night on the trophy season alone. We got a lot to talk about. Zach, go ahead and flip us up slide number 1, please. We have got to start talking about the regular season regs and this meeting in Maryland and this meeting in Virginia. Of course, they're happening all up and down the coast. These are just our local meetings that give us, the recreational angler, the chance to walk through the door and voice our opinion. And it does get recorded. And like I said earlier, the ASMFC folks really do seem to listen. Now, the Maryland meeting, 6 p.m., 12/6/23. That is next Wednesday night at Calvary United Methodist on Road Boulevard in Annapolis. It's where there are often meetings. If you've been to one of these meetings before, it's in the same place. The Virginia meeting is also at 6 p.m. the very next night. Okay, it's the 7th at the VMRC, 380 Fenwick Road in Fort Monroe. So I would like to personally ask anybody watching this right now, if you can at all be there, please be there and please voice your opinion. And we're going to talk about the options that you're going to get to choose from. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to tell anybody what to choose. I just want you to understand what the options are and voice your opinion. Okay. And have the ASMFC folks put it on the record what exactly you want. Now, we're going to bring up the options in a half a second here, but before we do it, I'm going to warn everybody. I don't want you to get too deep into trying to figure everything out. Zach, go ahead and pop it up. So when you look at these options, there are all these different columns and percentages, and it's just like, oh my God, I got a headache already. I don't even know what I'm looking at, right? What I want to address right off the bat is option A. If you look at option A, it's one fish at 18 inches for everybody for the 2017 seasons. Now, that doesn't seem quite like a reduction in the catch. And why is it even up there? Somebody tell me, what's option A about?
Mike, you want to take this?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So option A is the status quo option. And you see it also says or approved conservation equivalencies, which Maryland specifically has an approved conservation equivalency in place. And so option A is always an option in these documents. It's the status quo option, and it's what's currently in place, and it's used for comparison to the other options that you see that follow in that table. So option A is an option to support. It's always a placeholder in these documents as the status quo option.
So is it a realistic option?
Well, the whole purpose of the addendum is to consider a management change. And the option A does not consider a management change. So I think I'll leave it up there.
What I want people to know is when you look at this, if you voice your support of option A, are you likely to have an impact and sway the people who are voting?
No.
Okay, thank you. So let's take option A off of our table for the moment right here.
Yeah.
Zach, go ahead and please bring up the next slide. So why is all this going on? Well, you know, there are still some guys out there who are screaming and shouting that there are a bazillion rockfish out there and there's really no problem at all. I don't know if you feel that way. I personally have seen the fishery get worse and worse and worse for at least 6 years running now, maybe 7. Like there were so many dang fish you didn't even notice until 6 or 7 years ago. The numbers tell us it was going down before that. But there were just so many I mean, look, 10 years ago, I barely ever went fishing for rockfish. I went fishing for something else, and I caught my limited rockfish by accident. I mean, that was kind of what happened. Today, that's not happening. Now, we look at this picture. I took this picture at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. I can count the fish. 1, 2, 3. Mike, in the real world, is it that simple to count all these fish?
No, fishery. Oh, yeah. This is
oh, I got a groan out of you. Nice.
Well, it's just really challenging to count what you can't see. And fisheries science is not an exact science. And the data that, the data that we use to drive a lot of the population assessment models has considerable variability and uncertainty associated with it. And so I hate to say it this way, but the managers do the best they can on the information they have, but they can also consider, that it is an uncertain situation. And so they have some discretion to work through that uncertainty. But yeah, it's fishery science is a tough one to nail down. And this is why people frequently probably hear me say, like, it's difficult to be micromanaging our fisheries given the data that we have and the understanding that we have of our resources. And so having robust management is important. So anyways, I could go on about that, but
you've gotten to the point that I just wanted to make sure everybody was thinking about. It's really tough to count all the fish in the sea. Dave?
So to touch back on that fictitious 600,000 fish that MRIP says we caught and then says we live released, which means they claim that 9% of them died in March and April of 2017. That's a piece of the puzzle that we've been talking about, and it relates to how confident are we that the numbers are accurate, that the ratios of who's catching what are accurate when we have a system like we have that back in 2017 gave us brand new understandings of who's caught what the population is, the actual numbers of fish, and kind of spins things on their head. And that's happening right now, again, because MRIP is going through further analysis, as it should as a scientific system. And it's saying, wait, we may have been overestimating the effort of anglers going fishing by 30 to 40%. You can't manage by that yet, that's how the science and the process works. We get that. That's this looming reality that means, whoa, wait, this number on the y-axis could be completely way off, and we think there's so many more fish. Therefore, when we look at different percentages at like a number like 10% commercial harvest coast-wide, we go, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just 10%. Well, if MRIP's wrong and estimates effort too high, what it really means is that 10% could be 30, it could be 40, it could be 50, it could be 90. We really don't know. And that's the conundrum here. And everybody, especially on Facebook, pretends it's a simple answer. oh, make the rec guys do this, ban omega, make this happen, make that happen to solve these problems, but they're extremely complex, and the root, the base of the complexity, and unfortunately the cause of the complexity right now is this data question that unfortunately we've known about for quite some time, and I think managers have not invested in until very recently in a meaningful way to solve these problems. And
it's all very squishy math.
It's
very squishy.
Complain based on it, I'll tell you that.
All right, so Zach, go ahead. Let's pull up the next slide, please. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at the total number of rockfish pulled out of the water. And I wanted to put this slide up for an important reason. I want everybody to look back at the 80s and 90s, and then look at today. A lot of the Facebook heroes that you find scream and shout moratorium, moratorium, moratorium. And those of us who do not scream and shout for a moratorium then get the finger pointed as, oh, well, you don't really care about the fish. I just want everybody to recognize that the numbers we're looking at today, squishy numbers, right? They're squishy numbers. But the squishy number in comparison to the squishy number from back when we had the moratorium is way higher. So before you think about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, we still have, by the ASMFC numbers, something like 3 times the amount of rockfish that there were when the moratorium was lifted. When it was first lifted. Now, the restrictions were much tighter when the moratorium was first lifted, but just keep that in mind as a point of reference. I also want to point out here, if you look along the top, second line, harvest is from state compliance reports /MRIP. Now, MRIP's already come up in this conversation. It would be really, really easy to find a whole lot of examples in about 30 seconds flat of why MRIP is making literally impossible assertions, like 600,000 fish when you can't go fishing half the time because the weather's crappy. And by the way, there aren't that many anglers out there in March in the first place. But I did want to bring it up because I want you guys to let folks know why are we using these crappy numbers? Why? Anybody?
We're using what's considered the best science available, and that's the standard of fisheries management. And
it's the best science available. In fact, isn't it written into law?
It's not that simple. I don't know the exact answer because I'm not a lawyer and don't pretend I'm one. But I will say it is what I mentioned a moment ago is, well, I mentioned 2 things. One, the best time to start collecting data is 10 years ago. I've said that at some point today. I'm not sure if it was tonight or on a previous video, but we've also been lobbying, we've been encouraging, we've been providing examples of the way that the recreational community can work with states to collect data, to better fine tune the way they manage our fisheries. There's so many great examples in the South. There's so many.
God, that's a whole separate ball of wax. Hold on, Dave. Hold on, Dave. That's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. Right, Zach, please make a note. We're going to have a whole conversation about that. That's a whole nother discussion. I have been told by fisheries managers face to face, in fact, at the MRIP conference, that they are required by law to use the best available science. I believe it's written into Magnuson. Is that right? Someone might know. But it's just the point that I want to make as people look at this graph and recognize that we have these squishy numbers is that the powers that be, the ASMFC, really doesn't have a choice but to use these numbers. We're all kind of stuck with them, crappy as they may be, right?
Well,
Zach,
and exactly, and it's not that simple. I'm not going to sit here and pretend. I'm not. You know, I'm having fun tonight. We're chatting about this stuff. I want to get the point across. This is really important and hard to do stuff. And the very hardworking men and women that are up and down the coast at our state agencies, at the commission. I mean, Mike used to work at the commission. They're top-notch folks. I mean, they're sharp as a whip. They're smart as can be. I can't remember the budget numbers right now, but if you look at like NOAA's total budget versus MRIP's, expenditure versus all these technicalities, like there are very real-world reasons why we can't do what we can't, we can't do better what we're trying to do better. And you're trying to count something you can't see and it moves. And so
you can't count all the fish in the sea.
Yeah, I want to be really clear that I'm not trying to be critical of anyone that's involved in this system, because it's an extremely difficult thing. It's made more difficult, I think, by misinformation. And just so folks realize, when people say the very common term, well, it's all relative, or something is relative, that's a very real statement in fisheries. And so even with the scaling of MRIP, not quite sure what our effort is, it is truly all relative. So Lenny, your point about the biomass population, even if the number's wrong, the relative situation from the moratorium to now is different. That said, we can't tell the future.
Right.
We got to see the fish we have when we can.
I can tell you a little piece of the future. We're going to bring up the next slide because we are falling behind.
Look at that. Imagine that I'm talking too much.
Zach, come on, bring it up. Okay, so this is about a commercial quota reduction. Now, naturally, when we start looking at these regulations and see that we Recs are taking a hit, we want to know what's happening to the commercial guys, right? Well, are we taking the full blow? I'll just point out, as a fact, a point of reference, that in the state of Maryland, the last time the regs got rejiggered in 2020, I believe it was, recreational anglers took a 20% reduction and commercial fishermen took a 1.8% reduction. Now, we want to have commercial fishermen. We want to have guys catching fish and bring them to the fish market. But that, 20% versus 1.8%, I don't know, doesn't seem quite equitable. So what are we looking at here? What's being discussed this go round?
So the goal of the draft addendum, which again is an interim measure, it's really, we're looking at 24, is to reduce the removals coastwide by 14.5%. And that's why you see that number referenced in some of the column headings. The board is looking at options to reduce between 0 and 14.5%. And so we can do the math on our own. They've given us kind of the either end of the spectrum here. And they've also given us that what the landings have been recently. And so what people forget, a quota means you can't go above it, but there's no credit for staying below it. You catch what you catch, you sell it, you make your living, and you move on. And for many reasons, the Chesapeake Bay commercial fisheries have not caught their quota in recent years. And that's why you see that in the second from right column, the 2.386 million, that's the 2022 commercial harvest. And so they could have caught the middle column, the 3 million, the left in the yellow block. They could have caught that. And so they're falling below, I can't remember that exact percentage. And that means that the landings are lower than the quota. And I think it's 18%. Ultimately, the goal of the commission is to reduce total removals out of the stock, out of the populations, reduce those removals compared to 2022 by 14.5%. And the reason that this box is around these four numbers is what these show is if this document were to reduce 14.5% by the quota, we're going to take 3 million, reduce it by 14.5%, and that will be 2.566 as the brand new quota. Well, if they caught 2.386 last year, you're not reducing removals. Therefore, you're not reducing fishing mortality by the options based in this document. So unfortunately, this document, by the way it's been crafted, will not be able to meet a 14.5% reduction unless they put it on the recreational fishery. But if they put it on the recreational fishery, not only is that an ad hoc reallocation, which seems fine when you put the burden on the recreational fishery, but you want to reallocate in the commercial, oh my goodness, watch out. The reality is it's this false moving of fish, and it's this understanding that the rec data is accurate when we know it's not, and we say that all the time. But then when it's necessary to use that rec data to reduce mortality, we use it. And it's the most hypocritical component of recreational fisheries management at this point.
Now, I just want to bring out one other point. And Mike, I think you should address this. We're looking at the commercial potential cuts on this chart versus the recreational potential cuts. Do we have any sense of the value of a rockfish, recreational versus commercial? Which, just speaking purely economically, which is worth more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear to everybody that the value of a rockfish to the recreational sector is far more than to the commercial sector. Like we started this conversation talking about the economics associated with recreational fishing for rockfish and all the businesses that are supported there. And there's so many recreational anglers that adds up to a very huge economic impact. And it's frustrating because if you fish, harvest, catch striped bass, you contribute to fishing mortality. And our position is that if you contribute to fishing mortality, you must participate in the conservation of the resource. And so, Lenny, I just want to revisit. You said back in 2020, Maryland took 20% from the rec sector and about 1.8% from the commercial sector. And that was a conservation equivalency proposal that they used to move the numbers around. And that was really frustrating because the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission as a board had actually previously decided through that management action that both sectors would take an equal reduction. And so Maryland circumvented that ASMFC decision through the use of conservation equivalency. And what we continually find is that a lot of people, when conservation is needed, they try to spin these uncertain data in a way that helps them avoid having to take or shoulder the burden of conservation. Really frustrating, not good for the resource, not good for the process, not good for anything really.
It's frustrating indeed. You want to talk about some uncertain numbers? Here's some uncertain numbers. I want everybody sitting there while looking at their computer or phone or whatever right now. I want you to think about how much you spent on that rockfish fillet that you last took home and ate. You probably had $100 fillet right there, people. I mean, let's get real. You buy a boat, you fill the fuel tank, you buy a rod, you buy the gear. You're spending way more money than if you just went down to the seafood store and bought a rockfish. We all know that that's a fact. That's just the truth. So if you want to look at it from a completely economic standpoint, it's vastly far and away more valuable to the society for this shared resource to, at the very least, have a minimal allocation to the recreational segment that it can continue to function. And lest anybody question it, we are getting to the point where it is getting hard to continue to function. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with who are like, oh God, it's already one fish. You mean they're going to make it even harder to keep a fish? I'm done. People are just sick of it. Zach, please go ahead and bring up the next one. And as Zach does that, Carly's saying, do we know if there are any studies, discussions occurring to address other outside factors that affect populations, invasive competition, fish oil harvesting, etc.? That is another ginormous discussion. Actually, I would say, Carly, if you have a chance, go back and watch our Chesapeake Perspectives episodes. We actually addressed a lot of that, some of there. But I mean, the bottom line, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but the bottom line is we know those outside factors are having a massive impact, probably a bigger impact than recreational fishing, for God's sakes. I mean, we could just talk about water quality and leave it at that. And right there, or climate change. There are just, these are monstrous. Unfortunately, with what we've got coming for us, they're kind of moot because we can't take them into consideration through the managers can't take that into consideration through the process. They can just look at the numbers, and the only thing they can do is say, you guys can take more or you guys have to take less. They really don't have any other choices. The folks promulgating the rockfish regulations can't say, Omega, you have to take fewer menhaden, and then we can catch more rockfish. It's just not an option. unfortunately. Zach, what happened to my slide? You zapped it. What'd you do, dude? There we go. All right.
Well, and real quick, Lenny, there is progress on that front. There is a direct tie between menhaden harvest choices at the board level and the striped bass population. Those two are tied because we all know they're connected in nature. Scientifically, they've been connected, and so they're kind of on the new frontier of fisheries management, which is saying, what should our choices be about fisheries, about fishing mortality and total exploitation of the stock, recognizing that there are prey species that provide a tremendous ecosystem service to the predator species. And so that's happening. And thankfully it's about time, because that's the reality here. We're managing part of a system. The other piece is the predator side, which is the blue cats. There's a predator-prey relationship there. And sometimes that blue catfish is a predator to the striped bass. Sometimes it's a competitor, and it's probably not a prey. And so ultimately that's playing out. To your point, you're right. We control fishing mortality of striped bass in our current system, but the management system in some ways does catch those signals. One way in the Chesapeake is our young of year surveys. There could be no young striped bass in survey areas, meaning they got eaten after they got born, or I've heard people theorize that maybe they're not there, but that's for another day to figure out too. But it's important to kind of understand that it's in the works, and I picked that question because it's a great one.
So that the buzzword is ecosystem-based management, right?
Yep, that's what we're taking from. We should,
but that is. Stop me if I'm wrong. In its infancy, right? We're
correct.
Just beginning to take that into account. So today, for our purposes, we're kind of stuck still.
Correct.
And this next slide, I find terrifically interesting. Again, let's talk release mortality. We're going to flip from this one to the next one really quick. This is showing the breakdown with your take, right?
Yeah.
And it separates out the bay.
Yep.
And it shows a very different story of release mortality than the last slide. If you look at the bottom line there, 39% recreational dead discards, 5% bay, 34% ocean.
Yep.
How can that possibly be?
Makes total sense. First, like I've said a couple of times tonight, when you have less fish, you have less success. And so in the Chesapeake, if we're the ones first seeing the effects of poor recruitment, because we start, an 18-inch fish is 3 years old, they might be legal 19 inches by the end of that year. So we see them first. And so we're starting to see that first, meaning we're starting to reduce our actual live releases, our actual catch. It's happening. The data proves it. And so it's just a reality of what we need to understand to effectively manage a recreational fishery. Just like on the flip side, where if you have this massive abundance of fish, you're going to see a spike in recreational angling and their success, like what's happening in New Jersey. And neither one of those things needs to be this knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, they're catching too many fish, or, oh, the discards were what we have to chase. That was the fatal flaw of what Maryland DNR did. And I don't think some of the leaders still understand that. You don't move the math around. You just lower everybody or raise everybody.
I want to boil these numbers down as simple as possible. Okay. Mm-hmm. How can you have a different number of dead discards in the bay versus the ocean?
It is the volume of fish available to people, the volume of fishing. And so that bottom line tells me that there's a lot more fishing. Therefore, there's a lot more live release.
Well, there are a lot of guys fishing both places, though. Tell me this. Is there some possibility that there's a correlation to a recreational size limit, bag limit, that is easier to meet as opposed to one that is harder to meet?
Absolutely.
So if it's pretty easy for me to catch a 19 to 31 inch fish, I'm likely to fill my bag and go home or go white perch fishing or try and catch some sea bass, as opposed to someone who has a really tight slot, say 29 to 31 inches, and has to catch and throw back 5 billion fish before they keep one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what my sense is here, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, Lenny, what you're getting at, and this is from 2022. So the regulations for the coast in 2022 were 28 to 35. But your point is well taken. In 2022, the bay did not have a maximum size. And so their was more opportunity to harvest the fish in the bay than in the ocean, which did have a maximum size and a slot limit. So I think that's the point you're trying to make with this slide. And that's why in 2023, and with this new addendum that considers what to do in 2024, the managers are looking at putting that maximum size limit in the Chesapeake Bay and also narrowing the slot in the bay to reduce the total removals.
So we can expect that with a tighter slot, we're going to have a higher number of fish being thrown back, which MRIP will calculate as a higher rate of dead discards.
Exactly.
It's a mathematical formula. It's going to happen. So Zach, please bring us back to our options slide. It's the next one on the list. I did just want to make sure that that got into everybody's head, because here what we're looking at. All right, we've already gotten rid of A. We've got options B1 through B4, which, just to boil it down and make it as simple as possible, they're all slot limits ranging from 19 to 23 inches to 19 to 26 inches. Then we have two more options at the bottom. Option C. Now, they only go from 19 to 23 and 19 to 24. Why is that? You guys want to take it, or should I go? Because my head's burning right now.
Well, it's the overall reduction being close enough to meeting that 14.
Yeah, but what's difference between A and B and C? What's the difference?
The mode splits. Yeah. So
the mode split. What's a mode split?
So it's having different regulations between the private angler and the for hire mode. So these are two different modes. Private and shore are two modes, and then the for hire charter is a different mode. And so this specifically asks the question about, and I'll try to put this in layman's terms. Option C is, do the charter for hire fleet, do they deserve more access to the resource through a higher bag limit compared to the private angler? That is what this question asks between B and C, is should the two modes be treated differently? And again, this gets back to what I said earlier. If you participate in the striped bass fishery, you contribute to fishing mortality. And if you contribute to fishing mortality, you must participate in conservation. There should be no conservation passes here, whether you're commercial or recreational or some sort of mode within the recreational sector. And so from our perspective, keeping the recreational fishery together as one unit and regulating it as such is our preference. Maryland has not been doing that. The Bay jurisdictions have not been doing that. And so I think there's opportunity to correct that through this addendum and these options. And that is exactly what this question asks.
So I want to specifically point out that the price that recreational anglers pay for the charter boats to get that extra fish per person is a tighter slot limit, a tighter potential slot limit. It could be 19 to 23 through 19 to 26 if everybody gets one fish, or it's 19 to 23 or 19 to 24 if charters get two. And I want to tell you, I have been bashed on over this. Guys have told me that I hate charter boats, that I'm trying to ruin their business. Guys have really beat me up over this. And I'll tell you what, I love charter boats. My God, they take more people fishing than I can. They bring new anglers into the fold. They let people who are stuck on the shoreline who can't afford to get a boat to get on a boat and go fishing. It's a wonderful thing. I want more charter boats, not fewer. But, on the face of it, it's quite unfair that the recreational angler who has gone and bought a boat and bought his gear and bought his bait has to face a tighter restriction so that the charter boat gets two fish. And there is an argument that I've heard put forth over and over and over again that if you cut them to one fish, it's going to put them out of business. Now, on the other hand, I've received letters to the editor at Fish Talk from guys who were guides in other places where they never kept a fish the entire time they were guiding, and they had a great business. We have the Canada goose is another interesting example. We have guys who take people goose hunting, guides. They didn't get to shoot 2 geese when everybody else was shooting 1 goose. You know, did it hurt their business? Yeah, probably does. It probably does. Does it put them out of business? Not necessarily. And while it probably would hurt some of the charter's business to be cut from 2 fish to 1 fish, I can tell you right now, it's hurting a lot of businesses when the recreational angler just constantly has the regs ratcheted down and ratcheted down and ratcheted down. 2 at 18, now it's 1. 1 at 19. Oh, now it's 1 at 19 to 23. That hurts. That hurts boat dealers. That hurts tackle shops. That hurts fuel sales. That hurts the guys running the dry stacks. I have spoken with several marina operators who were quite happy to tell me that during the July closure, which I'm not arguing against, right? Maybe we need that. I'm not arguing against it. But during that closure, they took boats off the stacks 3 times. Whereas during a June weekend, they were taking off 3 an hour. There is a big, big, big economic penalty that others are paying for this to happen. So now,
Lenny, can I, before we move on from
please
that,
go ahead.
I'm struggling to reconcile how the managers could approve emergency action by a 15-1 vote and then turn around in a follow-up addendum and carve out some modes from having to participate in that conservation. And that's mixed messages. I think it's really poor management. If the board is so confident that emergency action was needed to rebuild this stock, they could not follow that up with carve-outs and conservation passes. Like Dave said, they're simply picking winners and losers. And this is what creates such mistrust in this process, where people just say, you know what? They're going to do whatever they want. They're going to pick winners and losers based on something we can't control. We've given them the input to not do that. They're not listening. And so it just discourages everybody from being a stakeholder and participating in this process. We think it's totally the wrong move.
The mistrust is palpable. Now, we need to get to our last slide. We're almost out of time. Dave, I saw you throw your hand up. Real quick, please. What did you want to say?
Next slide. I don't know how to do real quick.
Let's go ahead and bring up the next slide, Zach. Okay, let's go ahead and roll to the next one. We already discussed this. Everybody knows it now. B options versus C options is going to be.
Let me speak to this one, because this talks about how you can get involved. Mike is absolutely right. Lenny is absolutely right in all this conversation that's been happening about the frustration of anglers and the very real truth that they believe, which is they're not listened to. Well, they're not, and they haven't been. I am an optimist. I listen to you, but I am one of 3 votes at Maryland's portion of the table. There are tremendous folks around the table that will listen to you. And so one important thing to recognize, if you cannot make it next week and I don't see an email from you, don't ever call me again asking me what's going on, asking me to understand what's happening with all this stuff, because this is your chance to back up all the work that folks like Mike and I do, Lenny, Zach, others that are trying to advise and educate you all to be engaged. That is an important role of CCA. You can participate in any single state's virtual option if your state is not close to you and not convenient. The board members should be listening to you, but get involved early and often. Earlier, I said the governors are in charge, and that is a fact. The executive branch has majority control over the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission process and decision-making, period. You have a chance. You are represented by governors, represented by the governor's cabinet, represented by the people that work on behalf of them in these agencies, and your legislators. Especially if you have a business component, if you do not understand or know your elected official, it's on you. And
So
the opportunities for input are not only next Wednesday, and you have until December 22nd. And so,
and we've got here on the screen the email you can use.
Yep.
The snail mail you can use. Man, it's been a crazy night. We've been like rolling and rolling and rolling. Zach, if we've got any questions sitting there that really need to be addressed, let's get them up. We're already out of time, but I'm sure these guys will hang out a little longer to hit on any particular questions anybody might have about the options, about the input that they can give. I did want to ask you guys specifically to give people some really basic tips on how to give input that is effective.
Yeah, so I'll start, Dave, and then you can follow, because you'll be the receiver of all this input. The other thing I want to do before I talk about how to be an effective advocate is, Zach, if you could put up the link to the commissioners, and that link there provides all the contact information for the individuals that will be making these decisions. Dave is one of those. And effective advocacy is a marathon. It is not a sprint. My recommendation, this is how I approach it, is to establish a relationship with the folks that represent you at the fishery management table. Have conversations with them, ask them questions, become informed and knowledgeable about these subjects, so that when you have the conversations and when you provide input, your input is backed by facts. It demonstrates you have done your homework. It demonstrates that you can convey your input in a manner which can be useful in this process by the folks that are making the decisions. That's what's been effective for myself. I kind of have a leg up because I worked specifically in this process, but take it from an insider, establish a working relationship with the folks that make decisions on your behalf. They need to hear from you often enough so that when they're sitting down to make that decision, they remember the conversations they've had specifically with you.
I see one comment in the chat from Steve B. It says, "Sorry, Dave, I've emailed you, I've called you, I've tried to get in touch with you, and you never respond." So I want to let Steve know that my last email to him was on September 7th at 7:10 p.m. and I'm waiting for your response. So look forward to talking with you, and thank you for serving on the Sportfish Advisory Commission. I'd love to get connected and see what we want to talk about. Yeah, I mean, Mike said it spot on. It's all about relationships. It's all about being there and being present. This isn't for everyone. I fully understand that. And that's an important piece for all of us to understand. If this frustrates you, if this is something you don't feel like you can navigate, please don't. I mean, do more important, impactful things you can do in the fishing community. We talk about private anglers versus the for hire fleet versus all these things. I hate those terms. We're the public. We are the recreational fishing community. And no matter who we are, what we look like, where we come from, what's in our pockets, or what we may have invested in use of the natural resource, we're all equal, period. And we should be in the eyes of the law. And frankly, I'm inspired by leadership in Maryland that actually talks about that publicly. It inspires bold conversation like you've heard from me tonight. The reality is we have to really turn up the dialogue for solutions. And Kevin McMiniman had a question earlier about investing in data. There's a number of people. I think Kevin may have served on the committee. Lenny, did you serve on the Rec Data Committee? I can't remember, but
Data got me.
There's a number of people that I've seen comments from tonight, Rich Coleman, others that are involved in the advisory process in the state of Maryland. That's what I'm talking about with Steve Burleson. These are folks that are selected to provide advice. I'm one of them, and I'm no different than the rest of them. I happen to chair the commission, and so that just means I coordinate with DNR to run the meetings and to set the agenda. But we're all equal. Let's not kid ourselves. And sure, the politics are what they are, but we need to approach the things this way. And the reality is we've always invested as a community. We want what's best for this resource because every single one of us is passionate. We have rooms full of junk like this, like me and Lenny, tackle sheds like you wouldn't believe. None of it makes sense economically if you go down based on what you put on your plate. But that's the beauty of it. I live down the street from the oldest tackle shop in the world. I can call Tony Tochterman, literally the godfather of recreational fishing tackle, because he's in my neighborhood. How cool is that, Baltimore? I mean, it's unbelievable. And that's what this is all about. And it's why people get so frustrated when economic considerations are not really implemented. I mean, we have bad enough science on the data side with enough uncertainty. It is science. We also have great organizations like the American Sportfishing Association saying, look, this is the economic impact, elected officials. Because I'll tell you right now, fishing community, we're the worst lobbyists I've ever seen in my life. We're terrible at getting what we want. Because, well, you know what? We go to the regulators, and I do it too, and say, I want this, I want this, I want this. You miss the chance to actually weigh in on the process that's in front of you. And so if you want a 2-fish limit for some people next year, vote for option C in the Chesapeake Bay. If you want a 1-fish limit and equity across every single jurisdiction in the Chesapeake Bay, at least for 2024, vote for option B. Let me know which one of those slots you want. I support a 14.5% reduction in commercial landings, at least in the Chesapeake Bay. Kudos to the commercial fisheries up and down the coast that have stayed within their quotas and have very limited quotas compared to the Bay, which harvests 80% of the numbers of fish coastwide in the commercial fishery come out of the nursery. We have problems, and we need real leaders and real talk to solve them, and that's what it's about. The more you all get involved, the better decisions folks like me sitting in the table can make. This isn't, I know and I have the answers. I listen every single day and talk with stakeholders, and that's what it's all about.
You know, it's funny. Neither of you guys brought up what I think is the best tip of all on being effective. And that's to simply be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Just be nice.
That reminds me what I raised my hand for a moment ago, which is one of my favorite quotes as it relates to government relations and specifically fisheries management. And I first saw this quote during a fisheries management education system or program that I've been involved in called MREP, MREP, the Marine Resources Education Program. It's crafted to help folks like all of us get engaged in this process. And that quote is from a fisheries lobbyist for the commercial fishery, is the first one that ever told it to me. A great guy, Greg DiDomenico, a guy I'll butt heads with all the time. Mike will too, but he's an effective person involved in the fisheries management process. And he said, you know, Dave, as a supplicant to government, you cannot afford to BS. They reserve that right for themselves. And so as I hear recreational anglers keep saying, we need to organize, we need a new group, we need this, we need that. No, stop the BS, show up, get involved, represent yourself respectfully, and get involved in groups. But a group
nobody wants to sit there and be yelled at.
No.
They'd rather be spoken with in an intelligent manner. So I do think that one's critical. You just mentioned getting involved with groups. Zach, would you please throw up the CCA link? People, recreational anglers, CCA is our seat at the table. ASA, much as I respect them, is a organization that represents businesses, not individual anglers. So you individual anglers joining CCA is your best way to invest in having a seat at the table. In the meantime, next Wednesday night, 6 p.m., that is when we have the opportunity to talk to the folks from the ASMFC. And again, this is not a state of Maryland DNR meeting. This is an ASMFC meeting. So don't assume that showing up is a waste of time. Please come. There will be DNR folks there too. They will have to listen to you because they'll be there. This is an opportunity. That's what it is. It's an opportunity to say, I really think that B1 makes the most sense. Or I really think that B4 makes the most sense. Or I really think that C1 makes the most sense. You say whatever you want to say. I'm not going to tell you what to say, but this is your chance. This is your opportunity. If you're in Virginia, it'll be Thursday night instead of Wednesday night. Either way, I hope you show up. Folks, I apologize. We've gone significantly over time, not horrifically, but significantly. But I do think it is about time to wrap this up. And David, Mike, thank you both for joining us. Your expertise is appreciated.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Mike.